Well, I mean, it is like all of a sudden it is time. So we have I think we probably have everybody here that we're going to have. Hey George, good to see you, brother. Good to see you. All right, so we're back in Esther. We're going to be back in Esther 8. But as we start, let's go ahead and go to our Father in prayer. Almighty, gracious, and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the rains, but we thank you that there's not been a lot of damage associated with it, and we thank you for keeping us safe as we have driven on these wet roads. We ask that you continue to protect us in our comings and goings throughout this holiday season. We thank you so much for brothers and sisters of Black Precious Faith who have joined us today to study your word and to help us to apply it to our lives and to encourage each other. We ask that this study be pleasing in your sight, that it be scripturally sound, and Father, that it strengthen us for the work that we must do in your kingdom. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you be with those who are online and keep them safe as well. Some of them are on their way in this morning. We thank you for protecting them. We thank you for the healing that you offer those who are unable to make it here, and we look forward to having them again with us. We're so thankful that Phil's doctors have figured out the problem with his. He's on the mend as well, and thankful that EJ is back. We ask that you be with EJ and be with Judy as the daughter Karen in her therapy, and as Fran continues to recover from her illnesses as well, and keep her strong as she continues to adjust to the loss of Mary. We ask that you be with the Alita's family as they make those adjustments, and we ask that you be with Olin and Cindy as they work to support their family as well, and provide comfort to Stephen's family as well at his loss. We ask that you be with Barbara as she still continues to deal with her shoulder and the rehab there. We're thankful that she's in rehab now. We ask that you be with Wayne as he continues to struggle with his health as well. Once again, there are so many who are recovering from illnesses or looking forward to procedures. We ask that you be with them. We ask that you be with Kathy for her eyes as she continues to struggle with her eyesight, with her vision problems. And we ask for safety in travels for Mike and Karen, and for Kathy and myself, and for Pat as she is on the road as well. Keep her safe until she returns. We thank you so much for Esther and Betty, and we ask that you be with Betty and keep her safe as well. We ask that you continue to guide us and protect us in everything that we do. We ask that you strengthen our faith, strengthen our city, strengthen our nation. We ask that you continue to guide us and protect us, and we ask for a spiritual revival in this nation that might bring us closer to doing your will in the world, for our own preservation, but also for your glory in this kingdom. We offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. I forgot to mention Sophia's traveling. And so, Father, I add a quick addendum to that prayer and ask that you be with Sophia and keep her safe, and also be with Sophia and George as they continue to travel throughout this season as well. Again, Father, we thank you in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure there are others that I missed, and just be sure that you get back to me. And by the way, we're doing what we can to keep the prayer list updated. But if you want to pass us a note, we can work to get those prayer lists updated, especially if you've got a number of family members and there are status changes and everything. If you see them on the prayer list, make that note. And if it's nothing more than taking off, we make that back page so that it's a tearaway, so that we can use them for other handouts and everything. But if you can take that back page off and scribble the notes on it and hand it to us, we'll compile them all and we'll get those fixed up. So, okay, or text. Kathy does text. Don't do If you do Facebook, don't count on me getting back to you, because I don't do this Facebook. So, okay. All right. So we're in Esther 8, and so we're looking at, as we mentioned. I'll back up right here and note that we hang that the king has has hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and we've seen that Esther has taken her life in her hands on more than one occasion, and she's about to do that same thing again. Only this time around, she's literally yard waiting for the king. She's going to literally throw at his feet in her desperation. Okay, and also as a method of supplication. Remember, that was how you supplicated yourself before the king. So she's supplicated herself before the king to beg him on behalf of the Jewish people. And I'm going to go ahead and let Judy start, if you would, please, and if you could read, if you will, down to the first two verses to start with.
On that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told he was unto her.
What? Okay.
And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman.
Okay, so I want to note here that Haman the king has hanged Haman on the gallows, and probably it looks like before Haman could be taken off of his own gallows, he was actually hanging from the queen's gallows by then. So before they could get him down, the property the king had turned all of his estate and everything over to the queen. All right. And the king, and I want to note something here. I see if I've got that on there. The king gave King Ahasuerus, Xerxes, gave the house of Haman to the Jews' enemy unto Esther the queen. Now that's how the scribe of Esther is recording this. Okay. Mordecai came before the king. So the king called Mordecai there, and Esther had filled him in on, reminded him of all those things that Mordecai had done. And so now he is giving his ring, and I've highlighted here, which he had taken from Haman. All right. Remember, Haman violated and abused his authority by writing a law that he didn't run by the king, apparently, because the king was so upset with when he found out about it. But nonetheless, the king had given his ring to him, and it had been stamped, and so his name was affixed to the law. And now they have to figure out how to solve that problem. Okay, and so Esther for the house of Haman, but there's more going on here, and I'll mention that probably at another point. So has set Mordecai over the house of Haman, but he's also, as you note here, okay, he had taken off his ring and gave it to Mordecai. Mordecai now has administrative authority to do the same thing, and that is to draft a law through his scribes, of course. All right, and so now we see that that's done, but the king, remember the principle of immutability of law, and that is that the king cannot strike down a law that has been previously written. Even his own laws he cannot strike down. He can only something new that will ameliorate an injustice. And remember now also that this, one of the reasons for consternation, one of the reasons that they were asking the king, what's going on? All of the people was that a whole nationality had been singled out for extermination, ethnic cleansing. Okay? We'll probably see it again. But this on scale, because I remind you that the Jews were pressed into service throughout the king's kingdom, and the king's kingdom, the Persian Empire, all the way into North Africa. That's a vast area. And there are Jews all over the place. And so Mordecai is going to have to deal with that pretty much the same way that Haman did. All right. So she has thrown herself at the king's mercy, and the king has held out the golden scepter. All right. So go ahead, if you will, please. Starting in I think it's verse 3 we're at now, right?
And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman Agag and his device that he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king.
So Esther now is standing before the king. The king has granted her audience. Okay, and so obviously she's relying on the king's receptivity toward her displayed throughout this whole process, and so she's ready to make her request. That I point out here that in verse 1 of this chapter that Haman is the Jews' enemy. In verse 3, he is described as the Agagite. And remember that Agag was one of those kings who defied God and would not assist the Jews when they were actually making their way in. And actually, as a matter of fact, Agag was the king who Saul refused to kill, and Samuel had to dispatch King Agag because God had given them an order and Samuel had disobeyed. And that event, those events around that were why God told Saul he was not going to remain the king. Someone else was going to take his place. Saul lost his kingdom over the failure to dispatch Agag in accordance with God's ruling, God's command in that regard. Okay, so now we see that she's ready to make her request, and she's laying it out in a very also now that Mordecai is a Jew. She just told the king Mordecai is my uncle, so she's also just told the king I'm a Jew too. Okay, and so now in her position as the Jew, she's ready to make this request. Go do 5 and 6, please.
I'm going to step back up and pick up that last sentence of 4 so it makes sense.
Okay.
So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be right written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?
And so now she's saying, how can you let your wife go through this agony, basically, is the question she's asking. How can I withstand this? So she's willing to say, I'm willing to give. At this point, she's just indicated by the way that she approached the king that she's willing to sacrifice her life for the opportunity, for the obligation to represent her people here. And so again, and this is an interesting point that she talks about. Remember what we said about Hammedatha. Hammedatha was Haman's father. Hammedatha must have been somehow connected in government that Haman received that promotion that he got. Okay? And I'm not sure what the relationship was here, but I'm noting that Esther has made sure that the king understands that part of this problem probably falls on Hammedatha, and he's not one to be trusted either. So now you see that the king, not just Haman's downfall, but you see Hammedatha's diminishing in the eyes of the king as well, despite the fact that Hammedatha probably gave him a lot of money. But in any event, we note that he is described as an Agagite as well, but also primarily the son of Hammedatha, as she describes that to the king, and then talks about how that is done to the destruction of the Jews. And so she asked him this question: how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? And in my mind, the back of my mind, noting, however, how ruthless and how vengeful this king can be, still noting that when mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. Okay, so there you go. So that may be going through the king's mind here at the same time, because it's obvious that the king loves Esther. Okay. All right. So now, what does Ahasuerus do? Verse 7.
Then the king, Ahasuerus, said,
That's a hard one to pronounce, Ahasuerus, but that's okay.
unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it is liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse.
Okay, now, so there's that principle of immutability of law, which was laid down by and established by the Persians. Okay, and so first he says in verse 7, what more can I do? I've done everything. The man who started this, I've hanged him. Everything is done. And now he says, now, if Mordecai can write something that will solve this problem, I'm for it at this point. So he's given Mordecai his ring, and he said, write as it, that for the writing which is written in the king's name, he says, write also for the Jews as it liketh you, as it suiteth you. Do what you can through the law to change this. Okay? And so Mordecai has a plan, and his scribes. And so he's going to use the scribes. And I remember, I also remind you once again that many of those who were considered called king's scribes, king's administrators, were probably noble Jewish nobility who had been pressed into service as the king's scribe. Okay? And so they probably are just as vested in this as Mordecai is. They're not going to fight him. Mordecai is not going to have to do this all by himself. And so they all sit down and they write this thing. And remember, I'll bring that to you in just a minute. So let's do. That's a long verse. 9 is a very long verse, but it's important to. And I think I saved most of it. Go ahead and read 9 if you would, please.
Then were the king's scribes called at the time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies, and the rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language.
Okay, so now he specified the Jews there, but of course we understand that as part of that 127 nations that were encompassed by the Jewish Empire, these Jews would have been included in that in all probability. But remember, this is where we actually find out. I had mentioned 127 provinces earlier before when we talked about how big the kingdom was. This is where it actually is laid out in writing in this verse, just exactly how big that Persian Empire was. Okay, and so that's a big undertaking to write all this. And so keep going if you would, please, and read through verse 11. Actually, read through verse 12.
And he wrote into the king Ahasuerus' name and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post on horseback, and on riders, mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people in all the province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
8 should ring a bell for you. Okay, remember that and I'm going to back this up here. Here's Esther 3:13, the letters that were sent by the post, and we look at all in one day, as highlighted here, and then even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take spoil of them for a prey. That date we have seen that date already. Okay, that is Esther 3:13 right there. But now you go to and you see that that was it right there. There. That 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, in Esther 8:11 through 12. And then we note that if we go back to Esther 3:13, that's the same date that Haman had set by lottery. That's Purim, okay? And I want you to remember that Purim, that means casting lots, all right? And that date is set by Haman, but this date is set as the same date to specifically give the Jews the opportunity to defend themselves, but not only to defend themselves, to issue a preemptive strike against any who are perceived as their enemies. This is kind of carte blanche. You don't want to be on the bad side of a Jew on the day that this edict comes around, okay? That's going to come into play here pretty quickly, all right? So now, we see that we continue on verses 13 and 14, please.
The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the post that rode upon the mules and the camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan, the palace.
Okay, so the decree, it's still Shushan, the city, the palace that's there, and that city, that large city. And so we see that the Jews are told here that they should be ready against that day to avenge themselves. So now the Jews are sharpening with their implements or doing whatever it is that they're going to do to prepare themselves. All right. This decree is gone out in the same manner as the first decree. Remember that there were probably a lot of people who were, getting ready. They were getting excited about the opportunity to get rid of these pesky Jews. All right. And now all of a sudden the shoe's on the other foot, and now they're faced with the prospect of being enemies to someone who is empowered to defend themselves. Okay. All right. Now, and we note here, by the way, I note that it invented the Pony Express. Okay. So they were hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. The decree was given at Shushan, the palace. Now, I want to also note that the Babylonians had a thing too. Instead of writing the decrees like the Persians did, though, the Babylonians would take a stylus. They'd make a stamp, is what they would do. They would write down in cuneiform, and then the roll would be carried in a satchel. Writers would carry the roll to the edge of their province. In this case, Babylonians, they weren't concerned about whose language it was. They were concerned about their own language. So they would carry it to as far as needed to be done, and then they would take papyrus and they would roll it out on papyrus or roll it out on vellum, on a sheepskin. They'd ink it and roll it out, and that way they'd have the decree printed off. It was easier than carrying a lot of paper to all the provinces. They'd just go to the governor's office, the governor's palace or mansion, and they'd roll out an edict, and it was up to the governor to disseminate it. But here they have taken all these, and each dispatch is carried. So you're guessing probably over 100 writers that are carrying this information out to the provinces to get it done as fast as possible. Each one had a destination. So it would take as long as it took to get to the edge of the border for one writer from Shushan Palace now. Okay. And why would they ride on horses? Well, they'd ride on horses when they were riding through the Fertile Crescent, through the areas where the horses could get it. But they also had camel riders. Why did they do that? Because the shortest distance between Shushan and Ethiopia was across the desert, and then down through down by across the Red Sea, basically at that point. Okay, so we've got this message going out, and then we get to verse 15. Go ahead, if you would, please.
And Mordecai went out from the king in the royal apparel of the blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad.
Now I note that it was not just the Jews that were rejoicing at this time. This was all the nationalities that were not Persian themselves were going, boy, what a relief that this law has been reversed. Okay? Because now that means that if this law is done, this law can then be extended to the other nationalities by just a small petition. The principle that is applied, the judicial principle that is applied to the Jews, can then be applied to other nationalities who would also have the right to self-defense by just a simple stroke of a pen. It would be applied to them as well. Now, so we note that the city of Shushan is rejoicing and being glad, but probably everybody in other nationalities throughout the kingdom who is receiving this edict says, wow, this is a good thing. This is the king fixing something that he broke. Okay? And so, even though the king didn't do it himself. But now, I note that when Haman usurped the king's authority, he caused a lot of hate and discontent. When Mordecai used the king's authority to write this law, he healed a lot of the divisions in that nation, possibly averted a civil war in the process. Okay? All right, now, as we look at this, we see the royal apparel, we see the respect with which he is treated by the king, but you have to go all the way, and I'll jump back to all the way over to the last verse of Esther 10, and we'll see this again, but I will read this. Esther 10, verse 3, for Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. So Mordecai became the benefactor, the basically patriarch of the Jewish people throughout the kingdom of Persia, and he had the full support of the king. He was the king's right-hand man, number 2 in the kingdom, only to the king. All right? And so,
The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them.
okay, so I wasn't sure how long it would take us to do this, and I did not want to get into the follow-on to this. But we note here that that at this point, the Jews were excited, but now we also see that there are those who may sense that somebody that they know, someone who they have wronged because of this edict that is first. The edict came out and said, well, this is that we have the right to kill them. Now, when that happens, okay, when they're placed in that inferior position, and we've seen this happen in society too, when somebody's placed in an inferior position, we see that people look upon them with disdain. They look upon them with mistrust. They look upon them as someone who can be taken advantage of, and by so doing, they identify themselves as an enemy, someone who does not have that person's best interest at heart. Okay? And so now, these people who have responded to the first edict and said, boy, they're going to get theirs, and have told them, hey, you got it coming, stand by. Okay? Now, all of a sudden, those people who have made those threats, who have made those overt preparations to do this, are exposed to someone who has the right to strike back. All right? So now they're very upset. Now they're very, and they're very afraid. And I would be too, because again, we don't hear God's name mentioned here, but we see the hand of God. And we also know that many of those people who are subjects of the Persians, subject to the Persian rule, are very, very aware of the effect of the strength that God has provided to the people, to the Jewish people. And they also will have that feeling, as many do here, as is indicated in this last verse, that they're going against God. And they better get on God's right side, or they're going to suffer at the hands of the Jews. Well, the best way to do that is to become proselytized, become a Jew. Become a Jew even to the point, in many cases, probably most cases, of adult male members of non-Jew households as they proselytize, being circumcised. So there is visible evidence that they are that they are now a part of the Jewish faith. Okay? So there's a great deal of conversion going on here. A lot of it is done out of fear. Okay? But that happens a lot too. I mean, we have a lot of people who they're baptized into the church for the wrong reasons. Okay? And you see it a lot when you go to like Bible camp and places like that, where one person gets baptized and then all of a sudden all their friends go and get baptized too, because that's the spirit of camaraderie, right? Wrong attitude. I note that happens, but I also note that there were probably many who were proselytized, who honestly believed in the power of God to protect the Jewish people, and they wanted to be under that umbrella of protection as well. So we see the conversion. We don't see the conversion of King Ahasuerus, but we do see the conversion of a lot of non-Jewish people to the Jewish faith in the process of this. All right. Are there any questions or comments at this point? Observations? Phil?
It takes a lot of commitment from an adult male. It's not just, I want to be a part of it.
Yeah, it does. And an adult circumcision was a very painful process. Okay. As a matter of fact, there was one point, and I think that it was Judah. Was it Judah's tribe that tricked the group into proselytizing and converting? And they said, well, we won't kill you if you convert. But then while the males were immobilized, recovering from their circumcision, they killed them anyway. All right. That cost Judah. Okay, he paid a price for that. All right. Are there any other comments? The king knows they're Jews, and he's okay with it. The king knows that more, and has not only that, but has promoted Mordecai, a Jew, to the second highest position in the land. Where else have we seen that happen? Not at that point, they didn't want him to know. There was two reasons for it. One is the edict was in effect still. The edict that had been passed down against all Jews was in effect. All right. Two is that Esther not only was not a member of the royal family, but she was also a Jew. Okay. And technically held a position of servitude in that country. So it would be the equivalent of a king marrying a slave. All right. But the king has solved this problem. And it's a good thing for us because God, again, working in the background. King Ahasuerus' father did the same thing. Okay. Darius II, I think it was, who was Xerxes' father, did the same thing. He married a commoner, if you will, queen. So that precedence was established not by Xerxes, but by Xerxes' father. And so, so that information was held back for a reason. And it's pretty obvious that many of the chamberlains were involved in this. I won't call it a deceit, although perhaps it was subterfuge, if you will, withholding that information from so many people. Because had Haman known that, here's the thing. Had Haman known that Esther was a Jew, Haman might not have instituted this plan. And God's plan was for the Jews to have the upper hand and be preserved long enough for them to be repatriated to Judea and to continue the plan of the seed line of Christ. So we see God moving behind the scenes here, constantly in this book, and so we'll continue to see. We'll see how the Jews utilize this newfound administrative power and how it has a lasting effect on the history of the Jewish people. And we'll do that a week from Sunday, a week from next Sunday. We'll go into it. First Sunday in January, yes, ma'am. No, that's 30, Sunday is the 31st. It'll be the last Sunday, which incidentally will be our.
But we won't be having Sunday school. No, that's 24th that we're not having.
That's next week. The 31st is 2 weeks hence. So, and that's when, and we'll be back for that. Yeah. Okay. So we'll have that. Okay. So are there any other questions at this time? Thank you for your attention. Back at the top of the hour. Yeah. Okay, Phil.
Yesterday, Martin University won the D2 national championship, and right after the game, ESPN coach Paul Simmons, how does it feel to win Harding's first national championship? What words are going through your mind? And he quotes, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we have or imagine, according to his power that is worked within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever."
There you go.
Go Bisons.
What a great opportunity to do that now.
And that was on national TV, and he's always had a theme, honor God.
Yep. Honor God. But now, and I love it. And I think it's appropriate. And I think what Tim Tebow did was appropriate too. But no good deed goes unpunished, so stand by. So I would be very surprised if they don't get some negative press out of it, because I don't think that that the evil influences in this world are going to take that sitting down.
Right. Cancel culture will be,
Absolutely. You'll see it happening. You'll see it happening. But when it does, just remember, God has the last word. So, okay. Back